Hello and welcome, dear listeners, to another wonderful episode of The Best Games Period. I'm your host, Jack Gardner, and this is actually episode 55, which has no special significance. I just, for some reason, waited until a little bit later to say that. With me this week are the wonderful Jeremy Brown and Daniel Jones. How are you guys doing?
Good.
I'm doing. Middle of the work week.
Yeah, it feels like it's been a really long week already, but it's only Wednesday.
It really has.
It does.
What is up with that? Is that just because daylight savings is coming up again?
Maybe. The days are getting longer.
Days are longer, yeah, maybe.
Maybe.
And it won't stop frickin' snowing.
Won't stop blowing here.
Both, yeah.
Super windy.
Yeah, it won't stop blowing here either. Giggity.
Well, this week we are going to be talking about the 2013, dare I say, classic?
How dare you not say that?
From Naughty Dog, The Last of Us. I know we have a lot of strong opinions about that game on the show, so I'm kind of looking forward to seeing how this all shakes out. I know at least Jeremy, I know you feel pretty strongly about The Last of Us.
Yeah, it's pretty terrible.
And Daniel just seemed confused when we suggested that it be our episode this week. So I'm not sure if he's even played the game. We'll have to see.
Yeah, I'm not sure where he lands on that. This
episode
might be The Last of Us, depending on
your
opinions.
Well, now I'm kind of upset we didn't save this as like the final episode, whenever that might be.
Well, maybe that can be The Last of Us 2.
Oh, part 2, yeah.
Wait, is the Last of Us that show that's popular right now with the family? Mandy Moore is in it, and like,
yeah, heroes. Save cheerleader, save the world.
Oh,
yeah.
That one. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. All right. How have you been, Jack?
Like we said, it's been a long week. I feel tired, kind of a little bit out of it, but I'm putting on a poker face for this show to fake it until I make it.
Attaboy.
That's good.
Me too.
Yeah. Woo!
I was about to fall asleep, but I figured after we got to talking, I'd be all riled up.
Hey.
And I didn't want to
be
left behind for this episode.
We're not talking about Left Behind. We're talking about The Last of Us.
It's just a reference to The Last of Us in general, Daniel. Jeez.
Wait a second. If we couldn't include episodes 1 and 2 in the Half-Life 2 episode, we're not including Left Behind in the Last of Us.
I didn't say we were including Left Behind. It was just a reference to it was a pun.
I don't consider Half-Life Episode 1 and Episode 2 to be DLC. I consider them to be games in their own right.
Nope.
I feel like that's fair.
Nope. They're DLC.
No.
Oh God, we're not
They're
even talking
absolutely
about the game.
DLC for that game.
No. I'm sorry, but you're just wrong.
No, that's not true.
They're their own games.
You're kidding right now. No. They are DLC for... They're titled Half-Life 2, Episode 1, Half-Life 2, Episode 2.
But we didn't even have a conversation about whether we were going to... I remember asking, are we doing just Half-Life 2 or Episodes 1 and 2? And you both just said, no, Half-Life 2. So like you could have brought it up then, and we probably could have discussed it and agreed to do it.
I didn't have a problem with it, but I have a problem with it if we're going to include Left Behind, but not those. We got to be consistent.
I'm not suggesting we include Left Behind again. It was just a pun. Stop it.
I'm just saying that both Episode 1 and Episode 2 were released in box form, as far as I remember.
Yeah, orange box with Half-Life 2.
But they also had their own boxes.
Well, because they were PC, and that was at a time when you didn't download DLC. You still bought it in the store. It was called an expansion pack, Jack.
I consider them their own games.
Oh my God.
I'm sorry.
Well, because you can play Half-Life. You can play those games standalone. You don't have to play them with Half-Life 2.
Right.
Listen, I can stand with other people alone. It doesn't matter. I can play those games however I want.
Although, can't you do that
Same
with Left
with
Behind?
Oh, you just called them games! You just called them games, son!
Because they are part of a game. They're still games. They're just a part of another game.
So they're still games. Are they games or DLC, Daniel? Get your story straight.
So, by that logic, the Half-Life trilogy is already well surpassed.
Oh, yeah.
Because there would be 4 games.
Well, I mean, if we're not including those as DLC, then we should probably not include Blue Shift and Opposing Force. So really, there's been 6 games. How's that, Jack? Is that better? Is that how you really want to play this? How about let's toss Counter-Strike in there too. Let's just put that. Yeah, that's in the canon.
Portal.
Because it's a side story. Let's toss Portal and Portal 2 in there too. Those are just sequels to Half-Life. Yeah, let's do that. Let's say that.
I mean, they are standalone
Let's just make
games
up our own rules.
in the Half-Life universe. You're right.
So,
I didn't know you'd get so upset.
I did. I'm never making a joke again.
I just thought talking about Left Behind would be worthwhile since it's pretty important to The Last of Us.
Fine.
You'd think for somebody who's currently being relaxed, you'd be in a little better mood.
Well, I feel like episode 1 and 2 are important to Half-Life 2 as well, but you wouldn't let me use those.
We didn't even have a discussion about it. Like, literally.
True.
You could have said, yeah, we can include those, and we would have considered it. I would have been fine with it.
But I didn't think they would be. They shouldn't be included, just as Left Behind shouldn't be. But whatever.
We're not including Left Behind. That wasn't.
I just said it would be worth talking about.
Jack wants to.
I said it'd be worth talking about the same way you talked about what happened in Half-Life 2 Episode 2 a lot.
Yeah,
fine.
It's not like it's not going to be mentioned, but it doesn't.
Fine.
It's not going to.
We can mention it. The jury might have to strike it from the record, but that's all right. We can still mention it.
I mean, it's DLC for The Last of Us.
You know,
I just think Half-Life 2 Episode 1 and Episode 2 are their own games.
It actually released as a standalone,
yeah.
So it's actually its own game.
Pretty sure you can download it by itself.
You can.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So there you go, Jack.
I was trying to say that earlier, but Daniel was going on a rant, and there was no sense in even trying at that point.
So, Jeremy.
What? I'm not going to say Left Behind, that's for sure.
The Last of Us.
Yeah, let's do it. It is time.
That's a post-apocalyptic game.
It is.
It is. It's a very different post-apocalyptic game. It's interesting because it seems kind of like everyone has a different idea of what makes the game so different. So I'm curious to hear kind of what you think sets it apart from other post-apocalyptic games.
Huh.
Because we've talked about a number of them on the show. Like, I think maybe a good early example of this kind of post-apocalyptic sort of thing, at least in the same general area, would be Enslaved, Odyssey to the West.
Yep.
A lot of urban decay and plant overgrowth.
I don't know. For me, the thing that really makes The Last of Us stand out is the story.
Yeah.
Just how effective it is and how well it's woven into a lot of the rest of the game. I mean, the world itself, I think, is interesting just in the way that they present it. They kind of give you two different perspectives on it. They give you the perspective of somebody, Joel, who saw the world like us before it was destroyed and knows what that was like. And then the perspective of Ellie, who has never known anything different and is kind of learning about our world through Joel, and through the travel, through their adventures in the game. I think that's a really interesting dynamic, in that makes it unique and interesting.
Yeah, and so what The Last of Us is the story of this man named Joel who loses his daughter in the beginning of this gigantic zombie outbreak. She dies, and he kind of goes on living because what else are you going to do in the apocalypse? And it fast forwards like 20 years.
Yeah.
And humanity hasn't been wiped out, but in order to deal with the reality of this plague, which is this fungal brain infection that drives people crazy and causes mushrooms to sprout out of their heads, humanity now lives in these kind of walled enclaves. These enclaves are ruled by a totalitarian, authoritarian state. Then you have these freedom fighters called the Fireflies who are trying to fight back against that. Joel in this world is a smuggler, and his services get hired to smuggle this girl across the ruins of the United States to this Firefly enclave. It's revealed throughout this journey that she is immune to the fungal infection that causes the zombies to go crazy. That is a huge deal because no one has ever been found to be immune before. And they want to use her to create a cure for the plague, or at least an inoculation.
Right.
So the story follows them throughout their journey and is kind of delving into a bunch of different topics, but the main focus is on Joel reconnecting with his humanity through building a relationship with Ellie. Right? Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, that's exactly how I interpret it.
It's basically a road trip story, but with a lot more violence and moral quandaries. It's not planes, trains, and automobiles.
It's no Final Fantasy 15 road trip.
No, but it is very memorable. There are a lot of really memorable moments and scenes and characters throughout the game.
I mean, Jeremy, you love The Last of Us. What do you love so much about it?
Well, you touched on the story elements. I think the story really captures me. The gameplay, I think, is actually pretty fun. I tend to prefer third-person shooters over first-person shooters, so I like that. But it's not just a shooter. There's plenty of different ways to tackle any given area. I think it's really unique in that the cordyceps virus is an actual fungus, is an actual real thing in the real world. Now, it doesn't impact humans yet, but, so I think it's pretty creative to like, do you remember the first trailer they showed, like, at the Spike Video Game Awards, like, in, 2011, maybe?
The teaser, kind of?
Yeah, and it was just, like, this BBC documentary clip thing.
And then Ellie talking over it and stuff?
Yeah, it was just looked like real-world news. Nobody really knew exactly what that meant, and then we didn't get much information for quite a while. I like the way they took a different take on the plague and the infected, and it's not just this weird zombie virus that can't be explained. Like, there's some actual science behind this one. Again, not real practical. Nobody's suggesting that the ant cordyceps virus is going to mutate to humans anytime soon. But
yeah, it's not just magic zombie plague.
Yeah, and then just, the first 20 minutes of playing that game, it was breathtakingly beautiful on the PS3, and you didn't really know what was going on. The voice acting, like, you could tell right away that the voice acting was going to be fabulous, just between Joel and Sarah. And then when you make your escape from the city, when crap starts hitting the fan, then you're running away with Sarah, and you... Spoilers, by the way, obviously. And you encounter that military dude. You can even see the humanity in that guy when he's like, "Sir, she's just a child." And he's given orders to shoot them anyway. And that was pretty emotional for not even having spent 10 minutes really with those characters. Like, you're already like, yeah. Oh my God. I will say playing that part, like, the second time you play it, because you've developed a maybe if you despise Joel, you still have some sort of attachment for him. Like, it's just more heartbreaking the second time. So the story is pretty good. I think the writing is good. I think that the way they tell the story is good. It's it's still a video game, so it's got some drawbacks. It's not like they just have 2 hours to really tell this fluid story. I like the way it's structured. I like the way it's broken out into the seasons. For the most part, I like the AI co-op. There is the whole thing where Ellie just runs out in front of everybody and nobody seems to see her, and that is a bit annoying, but yeah. But overall, I think it works pretty well.
I'm interested to see how they approach that problem with Volume 2.
Yeah, me too.
The opening of The Last of Us is superb. It's a game that knows exactly what it's doing and is able to manipulate you into feeling what you want. At least right at the beginning. Maybe later on that can get kind of debatable. But the beginning of this game is super strong. You actually play as Sarah. So you have the perspective of this kid who's not really fully aware of what's going on.
Right.
And that perfectly fits with what the player is experiencing, because you don't
Right,
really
exactly.
know what's going on.
She's a very good surrogate for the player at the beginning.
Yeah. People underestimate the impact of who you're playing as, because it's a very subtle storytelling method.
It makes her death much more impactful.
Right, because you were her and she was you.
Right.
And you connected with her on that very fundamental level. And it's something that I think I even touched on in our best games of 2016 episode when I was talking about how much more impactful that Dragon Cancer is when you actually play it as opposed to just watch it happen. Because your perspective as a player actually does impact quite a bit how you feel about what's going on. And I think that The Last of Us recognize that helps make that opening so much more powerful. And you're right, the AI does kind of throw off things, probably more so in a game like this than in lesser games, just because The Last of Us has this dedication to realism and creating a believable world, like having a reason that the cordyceps virus, like having that be an actual thing that causes a zombie plague. That's just a small example, but all this believability and realistic violence and all that kind of gets undermined when you see the AI freaking out and being super weird. And granted, that doesn't happen a ton, but when it does happen, it's very jarring.
Yeah, I could go on and on about The Last of Us.
That's good, dude, because we're on a podcast about it.
So, I mean, let's break down the story of The Last of Us and kind of talk about that, and then I think we should talk about the gameplay at some point too. But the story, there's so much to kind of parse out in the story, but I think it's the way it's structured is really interesting to me, and it's part of what I really like about it. It's paced far more deliberately than, like, say, a movie, a post-apocalyptic movie. I would compare it to a number of movies and books, actually, like The Road.
Yeah.
I think it gets a lot of comparisons to Cormac McCarthy's The Road, rightfully so, book and movie adaptation about a father and son traveling across a destroyed America. You don't really... even less about what happened in that, but it was a huge influence, and the Naughty Dog and Neil Druckmann have said as much. Children of Men, which was an Alfonso Cuarón movie, and before that it was a book. Can't remember the author's name. And there are others, but it's not paced like those. It's paced, like I said, much more deliberately. They take their time to set up all the characters and to really kind of explore every character fully, or at least the main characters fully. And everybody that they meet along the way is kind of a reflection of them and their humanity, and is meant to teach them and us as the player, like, something about the characters. Whether it's Tess and her relationship with Joel, or Bill and his isolationist attitude, or the brothers that die, or even David in the winter section. Like, they're all kind of a different aspect of Joel, and in some ways Ellie, or kind of not so much a reflection of who Ellie is, but who she could become in this world. And so I just think that structure is really interesting. The way that the way all that plays out.
Yeah. I think one of the complaints I have about The Last of Us is there's a lot of deliberateness about it, and it knows how to manipulate your emotions and feelings. And so you want to root for Joel, you kind of want to root for Ellie. She's kind of the heart of the piece. But at the same time, I feel like there's a lot of mixed messaging, because by the end of the game, I feel like it's pretty clear that Joel is a monster, and that his relationship with Ellie is slowly kind of turning her into him.
Right.
At least to an extent. The game ends leaving it kind of an open question, but we see her lose kind of her innocence over the course of this road trip, learning how to kill and deaden her emotional reaction to that. And so by the end, there is a certain... I think there's this weird juxtaposition where people want to like Joel, and like, I like Joel. I think he's like, it's like, oh yeah, it's Joel from The Last of Us. Yeah, I know him. He's a cool dude. He kills guys and doesn't afraid of anything. But at the same time, oh my gosh, he kills guys. Like, he doesn't just kill guys. He's the kind of guy who would torture a man to death. And the game is weighed down by all of that horrific violence, and deliberately so. But I think it's hard. Maybe it's just because games in general gamify violence so much. But there is it's a little bit weirdly too satisfying, I guess, if that makes sense. Like the combat. And all the... Yeah. Like, it's weird to me that this game released with a multiplayer. You know what I mean? Like, the combat's really good. I get why it did release with a multiplayer. But at the same time, have either of you guys played it?
The multiplayer?
Yeah, it's great. Yeah.
It's really great, but it's also... It makes me think of, like, hobo fights. Like, it's basically starving homeless people beating each other with bricks and shooting each other with guns.
But I think that's kind of
food.
I think that's kind of what that world is, though. So, like,
right. My problem with it, I guess, is that it's weirdly too enjoyable.
Yeah.
Like, and that while the game itself is taking a lot of pains to make it clear that Joel is this violent person, that he isn't someone we should be necessarily rooting for at the end. I think a lot of people still... That message was lost on a lot of people. And I don't know if that's
really?
The fault of... I think so. Like, I think a lot of people are just like, yeah, Joel did the right thing at the end.
Oh, no, I think a lot of people were conflicted. I think that was the point they were going for. Like, I don't know, most people I've talked with about this game they were extremely conflicted at the end of the game, but kind of what it boiled down to is, they would say, well, in that situation, I probably would have done the same thing. I don't think you're supposed to feel good about it necessarily, and Joel, I don't think, really killed anybody that wasn't trying to kill him. So, yeah, maybe. It is overly violent, and I don't really like violent games. I don't like that kind of combat and brutality, but it felt different in this game because of the context to me. And
right.
You could, maybe while you maybe wouldn't agree with it, you could understand the angst and the hatred Joel had for everything, kind of based off what was happening, within this world, and also what happened to Sarah 20 years before that.
I wasn't saying that it's not understandable, or it just seems like there are kind of these thematic elements either in the gameplay or in the story that kind of seem to contradict a little bit with each other and cause a little bit of like mental friction for me when I try and play The Last of Us.
But I also think that's intentional.
Yeah, I think it is. I do. Like, I think you are supposed to think about that. I think that's kind of an underlying thing that they don't really make the game about it. This isn't like Spec Ops: The Line, but I think they definitely want you to question what you're doing in the game and why you're doing it. And that's part of the whole ending. And when you I think as a player, I personally felt like kind of betrayed by what Joel was doing, but I was forced to do it. So that makes you kind of reflect on the rest of the game as well and what he's been doing all along, and your part in it. You're complicit in that, and you're part of it. You're an accomplice to it, and I think the game wants you to reflect on that, especially with that ending. I don't know that I really agree that he's a monster. I think he's a product of his environment. I think he's effective at surviving in that environment. And that's, I mean, he has to be, otherwise there wouldn't be much of a game there. But, and maybe that's part of what you're saying. But I don't know that I ever really saw him as a monster. He's doing kind of what he has to. And I think what it is that the story is Ellie's as much as it is his, and the whole time you're kind of seeing her come of age under his wing, and the whole time you're kind of also a little bit like sad for her, because it's not necessarily how a girl should be coming of age, but that's just the way it has to be. That's the circumstances. I don't know. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. Although I'm not 100% sold on that exactly what I'm talking about is what they intended. Mostly because, and several years ago, the three of us did a podcast on this game in particular, and I brought this point up, and I don't know that I necessarily articulated myself well enough. And so I'm going to give it another shot here. But I think that if that was the case, I think Naughty Dog might have pulled a few punches that would have gone toward that end. The part I'm specifically going to bring up is in the winter season, where players finally take control of Ellie, and you're playing as Ellie. There's this wonderful segment where you're hunting a deer, and then that quickly spirals, and she ends up getting captured by this village of fellow humans. And things quickly become clear that they have had to resort to cannibalism in order to survive this harsh winter. There is a part of me that wishes that the game could just not end there, but just leave the scenario where it is right there. Like, they had to resort to cannibalism because things are that bleak. They're not necessarily terrible people, but they have to do something in order to survive, and they might as well eat strangers rather than the people who live in their community. And, like, that's already a pretty terrible scenario in which she would have to fight for survival. But then you also have that awareness as a player that, you know, she's fighting for survival against these other people who are also just trying to do what they have to get by. But the game's not content to leave it there, because they have to make the leader of this village a creepy pedophile child molester. And that bugged me, because it's like the biggest narrative cop-out you could have to undermine the whole connection with, you know, maybe that whole little thought in the back of your brain where you're like, well, maybe I'm not necessarily the person who's 100% justified in this situation. But then, oh, well, the guy's a child molester, And they're not just trying to do this out of survival. He's, like, genuinely one of the worst people in the world. So that in turn just justifies the outburst of violence that happens after this scene. And that really bugged me, because I think if they had just stopped a little bit shy, the moral complexity of the situation would have been much more satisfying and much more interesting to me than, oh, child molester. Yeah, obviously we're going to kill him.
I understand what you're saying. Yeah, it would have been just as powerful, maybe even more so powerful if that hadn't come into play.
Like, if he's genuinely just a good guy who's been put into, like, this Donner Party like scenario where they have to, do what they have to do to live, that's way more interesting to me. And so I'm glad I was able to articulate it better this time, because I think last time things got a little bit out of hand.
No, I agree with you on that. I've listened to that episode, honestly, because I wanted to understand where you were coming from, and I think I had already understood it before you said this, but this makes sense as well. Like, I agree. Okay. I think David's character, and now that I think about it, I almost think that I did kind of have a little bit of disappointment in that scene, but never could really identify it. That, like,
well, and to give, like, listeners a context for what this scene is, Ellie is literally imprisoned in a cage and in a room full of body parts that they're keeping cold so that, they can eat them later. And then this creepy leader guy, David, comes in and is, giving off obvious signals that he is, a creepy pedophile.
Right.
And, like, why does that scene need to be made worse? Like, she's already locked in a room full of body parts.
Right.
Come on. Sorry.
No, I agree. I think...
But the end of that scene is one of the best in the game.
Yeah, that's where I cried. I mean, this game didn't make me cry when Sarah died. I didn't cry at the very end. I cried at that scene, and I think it's because of so much of the story is kind of about Ellie's loss of innocence. And, and it really came to a head in that scene.
I kind of feel like you almost see Joel gain back some innocence, if you want to call it that, each time Ellie loses a little bit of hers. Like the first time that she killed somebody, when that dude had Joel under the water, like, he didn't want her to do it. It's like, at that point, initially Ellie was just literally cargo to him because he was a smuggler, like Jack said. He really didn't want nothing to do with her. In fact, he tried getting rid of her a few different times. But he grew to have an attachment with her. And he wanted her to try to hold on and not become like him, is kind of what it seemed like. Right. And he tried that for a while, and then it became clear that, she was going to die if that just happened. And not from the infection, obviously, since she's immune. But people would target her for a lot of different reasons. I'm sure David isn't the only pedophile in this world. I'm sure that that group isn't the only cannibals. I mean, I think we're talking about a world where people would kill you for the shirt off your back, or just to check your pockets to see if you happen to have, ammo.
A bullet.
Yeah. That's how desperate this world is. And, like, Joel, other than the pedophile part, isn't really better than David. They're just different, kind of two sides to the same coin. And all the other groups that you fight, with the exception of maybe the fascist military, they're all, like the Fireflies are by and large decent people. Like, you kind of root for the Fireflies. You want to see them succeed.
But you also understand the point of view of why these people are running these authoritarian states across the country that the Fireflies are fighting against. So it's all very... You understand the different perspectives.
They all have their, like, points. They all have their reasons, and all of those reasons, like, in our mindset, are somewhat immoral, but it's necessary in the setting and the world that they live in. we're still talking about story a little bit. There's like 6 or 7 moments in this game that I just will never forget. And I think maybe that's one of the reasons it stands out to me. And that might be one of the reasons why I kind of overlook the pedophile part of the winter scene with David. Because, you know, when he's sitting there asking her name and she won't tell him. And finally she just kind of gets this like soft, dejected, beaten look on her face. And, you know, totally tricks him, right? Like she's gonna, she's learning how to use her what she has to her advantage. So she plays the soft, weak little girl aspect to get him off his guard. You know, she's just like, Ellie. And he's like, what? Ellie. You can tell them Ellie. And he comes closer. Is the name of the girl that bit your fucking finger off. And then it's just like on. And it's like, holy crap. That was awesome.
Yeah.
And like, I didn't really enjoy seeing her rage kill him. In fact, that hurt me quite a bit. But I understood it. Like, I was glad to see him die, but to see her go berserk like that, that's one of those moments where I felt like she was losing her humanity, so to speak, while Joel come and, you know, grabbed her off and tried to calm her down and comfort her, was starting to gain some of his back. Now, every time it seemed like he was gaining some back, he would lose it again very quickly. But
remember that right before that, wasn't that the part where he tortured a few people to death in order to find out where she was?
Yeah. But he had something to live for suddenly. Like, he hadn't had that yet. Or hadn't had that before. Didn't want it. I mean, even Tess, like, clearly he had some affection for Tess, but when she just offered herself up to be the bait so they could escape, like, he was like, okay. You know? And regarding the end decision, like, I go back and forth all the time whether or not he did the right thing. Like, as far as the world as a whole is concerned, no. I mean, sacrificing one person for the chance to save everybody is a no-brainer. But when that one person
especially in a world like this,
but if
where human life is so cheap.
If that one person is the one thing you care about in your life, it has more weight than everybody else in your mind.
Yeah. I hear what you're saying about David, Jack, but I don't really put too much into that because I don't put a lot of weight on that because I think it's overall it's a fairly minor part of the story.
Yeah, but I think that's a very powerful thing to tap into, and to do it needlessly is something that really rubbed me the wrong way.
Yeah.
It's to service the point where Ellie does go into berserk rage kill mode. It's to make you be like, well, yeah, that makes sense. And it is to soften that blow, I guess. And that just let it be a hard, impactful moment, and don't try and undercut it with this justification that, well, he was a pedophile, so
I agree.
Yeah, it didn't add to anything. Like, it would have still been impactful, I think. You're right.
Yeah. So that's my major complaint about the story of The Last of Us, and like you guys said, it's not a huge deal in the context of the wider story, but it is just something that personally really bugged me when I played this the first time.
One last thing I want to say about the story, doesn't mean we have to stop talking about it, but before I forget to mention it, is I really enjoy how, like, the game has lots of juxtapositions where it's incredibly violent and just intense, but then you'll just be hanging out and, you know, they have these optional conversations that are just somewhat amusing, and you see Ellie being literally a little kid all the time with her pun books, which, God bless them, those are awesome. And just, like, there's just so many moments that kind of lighten the mood, at least for a second. Now, it turns real quickly. Like, even when they're driving the truck that they got from Bill, and she finds that porn magazine. And she's like, my God, how does he walk with that thing? And, you know, you're like, and they're kind of laughing, and then suddenly there's a brick thrown at the window, and it's like, completely takes you out of that moment, and you're you're back in go mode. As great as Ellie is as a character and the writing is, like the voice acting, like Ashley Johnson did an amazing job with Ellie.
Oh, yeah. She's good in, like, everything.
Yeah, that's true. But, like, it just wouldn't be the same without her. And
No,
Troy
yeah.
Baker. The character development, the voice acting, the mocap, it all came together in a way that was really cinematic and well done. And I like the little moments as much as I like, you know, the big crazy moments. Sometimes even more, like the giraffes. We've all talked about the giraffes, but that's just like something so beautiful in this terrible world, and it just kind of comes right, you know, at the right time when you just need it. Like you need that at that moment because the game is taking you through some pretty tough shit at that point. And to just...
But it's also really strong character development, too.
Yeah,
like,
I mean, even Tess, they killed her off pretty early, but they took some time to develop that character. And Bill.
Yeah.
Like, if you did all the stuff in that area and found all the notes and read all the letters and whatnot, like, you learned a lot about that guy. So, you know, that still sucked, even though you'd only spent 2 hours with him, maybe. And Sam, I mean, that was terrible. Sam getting infected and then his brother
Henry having to
and
shoot
then
him.
kill himself.
That was
I mean,
such a tough scene.
God. Yeah.
Yeah.
You both touched on it, actually, but I love the pacing of this game. It's probably one of the best paced games, both in terms of how the cutscenes play out, but also how the game itself is able to pace these ultra-violent encounters with these moments that just kind of show you as a player why life is still worth living in this universe where everything seems terrible.
It'd be so easy to give up, honestly, in that world.
Yeah. I mean, you see people give up in that world.
Right.
And it's like, again, we touched on Henry and Sam. Henry has to shoot his own brother, and then he commits suicide right after that because he can't live with himself after that. And so you have people who are just opting out of this existence, and it's easy as a player to question why even bother. And the game does just enough to show, well, okay, well, that is why people are still trying in this world where life is not valued anymore.
And what they do really well, you were talking about the pacing, like, immediately after that scene, they're just wandering in the woods, kind of just talking.
Yeah.
And that's so... And it doesn't feel dangerous, it doesn't feel oppressive. It's like, just kind of, you can breathe for a minute, you know?
And that's really rare in video games in general, because anytime, especially with a game that has a budget that's AAA, anytime you're having a scene where not a whole lot is happening, you have to justify that, you know, on like the development
Because it
end.
still costs money to develop that. So,
Right.
yeah.
Right. And so not a lot of games bother with the downtime enough. They don't bother enough with, well, why should we have this random conversation that doesn't seem like it's about anything that just happened? Why is that valuable? But it is really valuable, especially in a game like this. So props to the dev team for pushing for this stuff to get in there. Also, didn't the developers have to push to have Ellie on the cover?
Yeah.
I remember that being at least somewhat a big deal.
That seems odd. I mean, you would think that'd be a no-brainer.
The marketing think that goes on with video games is that anytime you have a female character portrayed on a cover, you lose game sales because that's not going to draw in as many people as, you know, grizzled white protagonist man on the cover.
So stupid.
Well, I'm glad Naughty Dog won that battle. And
Yeah.
Sony, whoever the marketing team, I'm glad they bowed down because I'm pretty sure that didn't impact sales. In fact, it probably helped them.
Yeah.
Well, it definitely set them apart from the, you know, 150 other games that had white dude grizzled protagonist on the cover
right.
Definitely.
that year. And another thing, just since we're talking about subtlety, I really like how the game approaches the side characters with subtlety. Like, you learn a lot if you just shut up and pay attention. Mm-hmm. You learn a lot about these characters. And like a great example is Bill.
Yeah.
Bill he's a gay character in a video game, which already sets him apart quite a bit from most characters in video games. And it's not at all obvious unless you're kind of looking around and putting two and two together. And that is rare because games like to take the shorthand approach to things, which would be stereotyping him. And Bill is anything but a stereotype, unless quirky isolationist is a stereotype now. Which I guess it kind of is. But
yeah, no, I agree. And even like with Sam and Henry, like, just like there's that part in the toy store where he wants to get like this toy and put it in his backpack, and Henry's like, no, you can't do that. Like, there's just all kinds of little interactions like that in the short amount of time you're with him, where you know that Henry's just trying to teach and protect Sam, but you're also like, quit being a dick, man. Let him have that little robot. Like, seriously.
Yeah.
What's it gonna hurt?
It's not gonna weigh him down that much.
Yeah.
Do you know Ellie actually picks up that robot in the store? But like, her character model does?
I did not know that.
Yeah, I saw something on YouTube that if you kind of, she won't pick it up when you're looking.
Yeah.
But if you kind of trick her, she will. And you can see her, because she hovers around where it is until you leave the room. But if you kind of almost leave the room and you look behind you, you see her put it in her bag. It's like little subtle details like that throughout that game.
And it's told through gameplay, not through cutscenes.
Yeah. Right.
Which is interesting.
And I really like the moment where Ellie and Sam are talking in that abandoned house in that bedroom, and she's, I assume it was some sort of a teenage kid's bedroom. And they're just talking. This might be when Sam reveals that he's been bitten. And he just asked her, how is it you're not scared? And she's like, who says that I'm not?
Yeah.
Just, those moments all add up to me to be great, fantastic. So should we talk about gameplay, or?
Yes.
Yeah, we should. We should touch on that a little bit, because the story I think is what a lot of people remember about The Last of Us. The gameplay is, I would say, maybe a little bit more of a mixed bag.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fair.
It's not perfect. It does some things very well. It does other things not so well, but I'm interested to hear your thoughts.
Well, so like the AI co-op, we've touched on that a bit.
Yep.
That definitely could be distracting and kind of break your immersion from time to time. I always thought that ability to sonically read through walls was kind of odd. Like,
yeah,
like in a game where you're scrapping for resources and every bullet counts, and every shiv and med kit count. You just have this weird ability to sense exactly where things are through walls. Yep. That just seemed odd. The stealth part of it, contradicting myself here, was really fun, and it was mostly fun because you had that advantage. But it just seems like that shouldn't have been an advantage that you would have if they're trying to keep with the nitty gritty realism of Wefton crafting.
Well, you can
weapon
certainly
Wefton crafting.
Weapon crafting.
You can certainly play the game on grounded mode, but
yeah, well, you have to get the platinum trophy.
That's very difficult.
It is.
Usually, I'm a proponent of playing the game on a normal difficulty level, or sometimes even an easy difficulty level if you just don't feel like putting up with a huge challenge and don't have a ton of time to sink into something. But I think The Last of Us is one of the few games I would recommend play through the game on the Ranger difficulty setting, because it's actually, I would say, much better on that slightly higher difficulty. You actually have to scavenge in order to get materials. You have to make use of stealth.
And there's far fewer materials to even scavenge. Like,
Right.
Because when I played it
Yeah.
on that difficulty, it was probably the fourth time I'd played it. So I knew where everything was. You go to, I would say about at least 75% of those items were gone on that playthrough. So you really had to make it count.
Yeah, it gets real tense. You have to use a lot of bricks.
Yes, you do.
Let me tell you.
The first time I played that game was at PAX East, the year before it came out. To be honest, like I was worried after I played the demo. It was the demo that they had at PAX East was the Boston area where you first encounter clickers. They're the blind infected that go by sound, that can't really see you, but they can hear very well. And there was one clicker or two clickers in the area, and a bunch of random other zombies strewn about the room, and you have to make your way through. And when I play the game now, like, I'm able to get through that area easy. But I played the demo over and over, probably like 5 times, and I could never get past it. So I got really frustrated. But it's just that was not a spot in the game that demoed really well, in my opinion, because you hadn't learned the mechanics and kind of all the tools at your disposal. So I remember thinking, like, oh man, I'm not gonna like this game. Like, this game's just not for me. But the way that they kind of gradually introduce all of the elements to you, they do a spectacular job of pacing. It's just like the story. They kind of pace out the gameplay really well. There's no, like, obvious tutorial level. The game just kind of builds up and adds layers of the gameplay to it. It adds, it has to explain the crafting system to you, which is, I really enjoyed the crafting in Last of Us. Likewise, like, I'm playing Horizon right now, and the crafting's fine in that, but it's not nearly as intuitive as in, like, The Last of Us. To me, it's an evolution of games like Resident Evil and Resident Evil 4 and Dead Space, and even in some ways like Metal Gear Solid, like, just the way that the stealth works.
I think the game works a lot better when it's smaller encounters, more personal encounters with other humans.
Yeah.
That's when the gameplay really shines. That's when it feels like everything's coming together really well. Because whenever there's like 30 or 40 guys, it just feels odd. Right. I'm not quite sure how to expand on that, but it doesn't feel quite right.
Yeah.
For what the gameplay is designed for. And I will also say that I am not a huge fan of any of the sections that involve the zombies. Just because it doesn't feel... It just doesn't feel right, I guess. Like, just... There's something about the combat in these games that doesn't quite mesh with the zombies that they made.
Huh.
And I'm not sure exactly how to put my finger on it, but it just always felt like I was woefully under-equipped to deal with these zombies. Like, it's almost all the time you're better off trying to just run away from the zombies than to actually fight them, which is fine, except that a lot of the areas are constructed in a way where it forces you to fight them. Right.
Or
maybe
it's so hard to stay stealthy, and once one spots you, usually they all come running.
Yeah. And so maybe that's because I played it on a higher difficulty that I generally enjoyed. But the parts with the zombies tended to lean more towards screwing you over than having a sense of, I guess, fair play between you and the zombies. Like, whenever I did slip up, it never felt really like it was 100% my fault. Especially when you're trying to be stealthy and you're seeing your AI partners just running all over the place.
Yeah.
And then you step 1 foot out of line and everything kills you.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true in the areas where, not even just the zombies, even when you're fighting the other humans in the areas where there's a bunch of them walking around. Like, if you don't get it just perfect, then they know where you're at. They're all on you. And you can run and hide and whatnot and kind of reset that. But it doesn't feel like you ever have enough tools, weapons, ammo, whatever, to take them all. I mean, you can't just start chucking your few grenades you have and wasting your precious bullets.
That, and I freaking hate clickers.
Yeah.
I'm not a huge fan of anything in games that just insta-kills you. But clickers insta-kill you. That's not fun. Oh, you screwed up. Well, you're dead now.
I don't know. I think it makes them more formidable. You really don't want to get caught by a clicker. Makes them scarier.
They weren't scary to me. They became irritating.
Oh, man.
It's like, oh, it's a clicker again. That means I'm probably going to spend at least 20 to 30 minutes trying to get past this part because they'll just keep killing me.
It took me forever to get through that high school, or that gym part, that basketball area.
Oh, well, that part is stupid.
Yeah.
I don't like the bloaters.
Yeah, they're
I do not like those at all.
And also I think it was a bus station that was flooded. Those two areas in particular stuck out as being just keep trying and trying and trying until you finally get lucky more than anything.
And the zombie parts aren't necessarily bad. They're just not as enjoyable as the rest of the game. Which kind of brings me back to my initial point, which is, should this game even be enjoyable at all? Because that almost seems to undermine what they're going for.
Yeah, I don't know if enjoyable is the right word.
It's satisfying, though.
Yeah.
The combat is generally satisfying. Like, beating someone's skull in with a brick is actually pretty satisfying. You're like, yeah, I accomplished that.
Like, not to get all dark here, but maybe that's something that they're trying to say. Like maybe that's on purpose. Maybe they're trying to say something about the nature of humanity. I don't know.
What is man but vile and wretchedness?
Right. And maybe I'm ascribing a little too much meaning and giving them a little more credit than they deserve, but I feel like if any game kind of warrants that sort of philosophical analyzation, it's this.
It does at least earn that consideration.
Right.
As opposed to other games that might try and claim that, but don't necessarily have the same amount of substance to back it up.
Right.
I get what you're saying.
Or maybe they just needed to make a game that was fun to play, because people won't play a 20-hour game that's not fun to play.
I mean, that's kind of what I wonder when I think about this game in retrospect, just because I think, you know, the video game industry obviously is still evolving. You have to remember this was only a little bit after Gone Home had come out, and people were totally not ready for that to be a game. There are still some people who are like, Gone Home isn't a game because it's not fun. There are still people who say that. Even people when we did our episode. I'm not going to say a ton of people, but there were a few people who said that to me. I think you're right. I don't think they could get away with making a pure artistic statement by having gameplay that's just not fun. Like, that's just not satisfying to the same degree people would otherwise expect a third-person shooter to be.
Well, you talked about, like, that Dragon Cancer, like, that game does it. I think games have done that. But, like, yeah, a third-person shooter like this, I don't... Especially a big-budget one.
I mean, even with that Dragon Cancer, people pirated the crap out of that game or just didn't buy it because they didn't see the value in playing a game that wasn't fun.
Right.
Sorry, I interrupted you to reiterate the point you just made.
No, it's fine. It's fine.
Sorry.
I don't know. Yeah. It's weird because on a pure just gameplay level, I really enjoy the game. I really enjoy kind of the open-ended nature of a lot of the encounters. Like, you can... Specifically, I always come back to the one that they showed at E3. That kind of blew me away at E3, and I think it's one of the more effective encounters of that type in the entire game. Just the way that they... Like, you're in that hotel, if you don't know. You're in this hotel, you approach the hotel, and you have a few different windows you can go in, and each window goes to a different room, and you're on the roof, but you have options of where to start the fight. You have options of where to go from the start, and how to approach it. Do you want to go in loud, or do you want to be stealthy? And then when things go wrong, you also have more options. Like, Ellie, if you're in trouble, Ellie will throw a bottle at a guy's head or hit him with something. Like, and that happened in the E3 demo, and it really happens in the game, and it is dynamic, and it is exciting and fresh and fun. Like, that, it is fun. And so, just purely analyzing this game on a video game level, it's enjoyable. It is fun. I like the combat. I like that it's not... Like, personally, I prefer Last of Us's gameplay to Uncharted. Like, Uncharted, to me, is just shooting. And there's fun shooting. And there's the puzzles, and there's the platforming. The platforming's not usually all that fun, necessarily. It's just kind of there. And the puzzles are fine, but like with The Last of Us, the gameplay feels like it has purpose, and it feels intense the entire time, and it feels less rigid and structured, and just I really enjoy the gameplay on a pure gameplay level.
Oh, I enjoy it too.
Right.
That demo, by the way, was great. The way it ended, like,
yeah,
just left your jaw dropped. You're like, oh man, this game is gonna be something. You weren't entirely sure what yet, but you knew it was gonna be hardcore.
Yeah. But like, that just happens, and then you just move on. You know, like, that's not like a big part of the game. That's not like a huge set piece moment in the game. It just kind of happens.
That's part of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people were a bit split on the abrupt ending to The Last of Us. I just wanted to get your takes on that first before we close out the episode.
Okay, so the ending. So, like, maybe we should start from right before the ending.
Yeah. As always, we spoil games on Best Games Period.
But so the setup is that Joel gets Ellie to the Fireflies. The Fireflies are like, well, okay, we're going to dissect her brain because it has, the thing that is immune to this virus, and we need to study that, otherwise we can't make a cure. And Ellie is unconscious for all of this. She's been put under anesthesia, and Joel decides that, he's not going to let her be sacrificed to try and find this cure. And so he basically murders all of the Fireflies, including the surgeon, who is probably the last person alive with the expertise needed to actually open up a person's brain and get a sample and develop a cure. And then he takes Ellie and he murders Marlene, who's the leader of the Fireflies, and drives off. Ellie wakes up and she's like, what happened? Joel's just like, well, we left.
Well, he lies to her.
Yeah.
He says that
right.
He tells her they found somebody else, that they've tried it lots of times and it just won't work.
They've tried it and it never worked.
Yeah. Then they get out of the car and they're heading back to Tommy's, and she kind of turns and asks him, are you telling me the truth? And he says, yeah. And then the game just kind of ends right after that.
Promise me, Joel. Like, that's... Yeah, I'll never forget that.
She kind of looks at him and says, okay.
And knowing...
Cuts to black.
And I always felt like she knew that he was lying, personally.
Yeah, I did too.
Yeah.
Yep. I wonder if you're supposed to, or if they wanted that to be ambiguous.
I've talked to people that said they didn't think that. or that it just made them think about it. They weren't sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty clear that by the end of the game, she's matured enough to see and knows Joel well enough to know that he's not being 100% truthful. Yeah. Maybe she doesn't think that he murdered all the fireflies, but she knows him well enough to know that he's not being 100% truthful about what happened.
Yeah, she knows something's up.
Yeah, and maybe where she's at right now, that's something she's willing to live with, as opposed to pushing to find out the truth and having to judge Joel based on that, you know?
And maybe it'll come back to it.
You
never know. Maybe she just decided to let it rest for a while and deal with it later.
Yeah, that's the other thing. That ending is perfect for what the game has built up for this entire time. It's a perfect, concise ending for this very morally ambiguous world. And I'm kind of upset that they're returning to it with the same characters, supposedly. Because honestly, I've never gone back to play this game a second time.
Really?
Because it was just so overwhelming and powerful the first time. And I had such a distaste for, like, a strange mixture of distaste and, general like for these characters. That it was hard to jump. It was hard imagining jumping back into that and playing the story again, because it's very bleak. It takes a lot of emotional energy.
Yeah.
To play through this game.
Yeah.
It takes a toll. Like killing these people, while it's very satisfying in a strange way, becomes tiring on an emotional level because it's personal each time. But so I'm a little bit torn on the fact that they're actually coming back to it again. I would have liked to see maybe a different story set in this world rather than a continuation of their story. But for the ending, for what it was, leaving it as an open question and letting your imagination fill in what would happen down the line, I think it was really good.
I remember at the time saying that I didn't ever want a sequel at all.
Right.
And I stuck to that for a while, but after a few years and seeing that just initial teaser trailer, I won't deny that I'm intrigued by The Last of Us Part 2.
I'm intrigued by it too, but I'm kind of curious to see maybe if that game changes how I feel about the ending of this.
And I'm actually worried about that, to be honest.
Yeah. Like, I mean, as much as we say, we'll still have this game, it does change the context of that ending if we then see what happens later.
Right. You can't erase that from your mind. It skews how you feel about it.
Yeah.
But we'll see. I'm certainly going to play it. I'm definitely interested. But I had the same reaction. Like, I don't really need more The Last of Us.
Now that it's coming, it's like, well, I guess I'll take it. It's like, I don't really need to order another pizza, but since it's buy one, get one free, yeah.
Gonna have to eat the whole thing. But Left Behind's pretty great, though, huh?
It is. As a standalone game, I think it's amazing.
Pretty good bit of DLC.
It is. It's worth playing. Worth checking out.
To be honest about Left Behind, I would have been happier if it was just Ellie and Riley, and there was none of the winter stuff.
Yeah, it was cool either way, but the best parts were the Ellie and Riley parts for sure.
So, is The Last of Us the best game period?
I'm not even going to give any argument. I'm just going to say absolutely.
Yeah, me as well.
I am kind of on the fence. I definitely think it is a fantastic, fantastic game. I don't know necessarily if I would say it's a best game. I'm leaning towards yes, but I guess I would give it a soft yes. Like, how The Last of Us Part 2 shakes out and how that affects my interpretation of the ending could actually push me back to a no. But for now, I'm leaning yes. So I guess I'll also say yes.
Well, after The Last of Us Part 2 comes out, I think it's certainly worth revisiting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll have to have another one of our episodes where we kick one out.
It's just such a perfectly self-contained game that doesn't feel like it needs expansion.
No, I get that.
It makes any... Yeah. You get what I'm saying. I don't need to babble about it.
All right, so for now, we're all in agreement.
All right.
That's good.
For now.
A soft
Great.
now.
All right, that was episode 55 of the Best Games Period. Thank you all for listening. Jack, can you tell everybody about Extra Life?
Yes, I can, Daniel. So, what is Extra Life? Basically, you get to play video games or board games or really any kind of game, and you get to raise money for Children's Miracle Network hospitals. And you know what? Each person who signs up can choose which Children's Miracle Network hospital they want their money to go to, and 100% of all the money they raise from friends, family, strangers, by whatever means they choose, 100% of that goes to that hospital.
You could even choose extortion. I mean, as long as it goes to a good cause.
You could. Just
got
don't
some
get
dirt
caught.
on your boss? Say, hey, listen, either you donate some money to my Extra Life, or I'm going to be sharing these awkward Christmas pictures, Christmas company party pictures with the whole world. You know.
Where I saw you just standing in a corner talking to the water cooler.
That's right.
It was very awkward.
And I got some audio, those things you said to that water cooler. Look, I don't judge, but I'm not saying other people might not, so...
All I'm saying, it was very much a water cooler moment. Just play games, help kids. Really that simple. For more information, you can head over to extra-life.org, or to get more involved in the community, you can head over to community.extra-life.org, where you can find out more about your local Extra Life area. Maybe there are some people there you can join forces with and raise some more money with. You can chat with people about how to raise money more effectively, or you can read some interesting video game articles about, games. You can read some interesting game articles about games. Whoa, crazy. Game articles about games. And you can also find this very podcast as well. Today, actually, we had an interesting article go up about the recent update to No Man's Sky.
Yeah.
Which, are you going to get back into that, Daniel?
Yeah, I'm gonna try. I've got it downloaded. I played a little bit recently, and I'm gonna try out the vehicles for sure.
So, Daniel, besides Extra Life, where Jack just said you could find the show, where else can you find this show?
Yeah, you can also find the show, besides community.extra-life.org, on Twitter at bestgamesperiod. You can also find it on iTunes, as well as on SoundCloud. And you can find the show on Game Informer when Jack posts it every Monday. Every week I post a poll that discusses what our listeners think of the game that we discussed that episode. And this past week was The Legend of Zelda, which you think would be a no-brainer.
Some people just want to watch the world burn.
It was actually a lot closer than you would have
Really?
anticipated. But eventually
Come
The
on,
Legend of
guys.
Zelda prevailed and was voted by our listeners as a best games period.
Did people say why they were voting against it?
Well, some people on Facebook and on Twitter, basically, the gist of what I got from a lot of people was that it's not the best Legend of Zelda game, so it shouldn't be a best games period.
people
feel
are
like
still confused about the format of this show sometimes. Like,
yeah.
It's not Highlander. There can be only one. I mean...
Yeah, I could probably do a better job in the polls of describing what a best games period is, but the way I kind of described it to one person who said that was, think of this more as like a Hall of Fame of games. And does the original Legend of Zelda deserve to be in that Hall of Fame? I would say that's a no-brainer.
Yeah, I mean, like, Scottie Pippen and Michael Jordan can both be in the Hall of Fame when they played for the Bulls. Like, it doesn't need to be only one.
Dennis Rodman doesn't need to be, but... Horace Grant.
Horace, I was about to say Horace Grant. Is on the fence. It's kind of a
not quite.
Yeah.
All right, so you can find that every Monday. You can also find our Patreon at patreon.com/bestgamesperiod. We would love it if you support our Patreon because that would help us immensely to just improve the show. We really just want to make the show better. We don't make money doing it, but we do spend money doing it. Namely, Jeremy and Jack spend money doing it. So we want to make the show better, and if you'd support us on Patreon, we do have special episodes and content and other bonuses and goodies for people that support us. So check that out, patreon.com/bestgamesperiod. My goodness, these wrap-ups take too long. Jack.
Daniel.
Jeremy.
I want to clarify, Jack pays for the show. I don't.
Oh, all right.
We basically just want to cover costs.
All right. Till next time, everybody. We'll see you all on the flippity dippity.
Do-da-do-day. The Last of Us soundtrack is actually pretty great as well.
Oh, we didn't talk about the soundtrack. It's really great.
We just did. It can stay in there. It's great.
Yeah. Leave that in there, Jack. Ah, it's so good.